And we are back, but not from a commercial break. We are back from a failed internet. And so Doug has gratefully, gratefully from my point of view, agreed to come back and finish this show. And I don't know if you remember where we were, Doug, when it dropped, but you were actually talking about The Secret, which was kind of funny, the timing. And you said, to quote you, you said, that is why The Secret was so important, to have something that would mean, that would justify, and then you were gone. So,
Well, if you, as a writer, if you're going, or a movie, a storyteller, if you're going to tease the audience with the promise of a secret that is the raison d'etre of the whole piece, is uncovering this mystery, then it has to justify the journey. Otherwise, it's going to be a very unsatisfying experience for the reader. And, what held me up was, as I mentioned, for a very long period of time, I just couldn't come up with anything that I enjoyed, that I thought would be worthy of the reader's time to go through a novel to get. And then once I did, then I couldn't wait to get back to the story. So I just think that in general, you can't set an impossible standard, because basically, let's face it, there have been millions and millions and millions of stories told over the centuries at this point in all mediums. So the chances of you coming up with a wholly unique, never unprecedented story are pretty, astronomical.
yeah.
So, but if you find something that entertains you, that you say, oh, that surprised me, then the chances are it will surprise other people. And then the uniqueness will come from the way your characters react to it, because your characters are unique.
Right.
If you have created, three-dimensional characters, then like every human being is a fingerprint. They're not quite the same. So there will be uniqueness automatically attached to that secret.
Yeah, and the secrets go throughout. Like, you started to talk about the poison of the secrets.
Oh,
And
yes. In interpersonal relations, my book is really, it's about a lot of things, but family and the dynamic of families is a big theme of the book. The McKenna family is a loving family, but they've got problems like most families do. We have those Sears Roebuck family portraits where everybody
right.
is, and nobody's burping or farting at the Thanksgiving dinner table and doing all those things that happen in real
What?
life.
I don't know what family you're talking about.
But this is what I discovered is that right behind, I mentioned to you off the air that my role model for my inspirational life was a guy named Gene Shepard, who was on the radio in New York for many, many years. And most people know from A Christmas Story, which he wrote and narrated. But he said one time, when I was 9, I didn't have secrets. I was a secret. And I think that most kids have they're living their lives in secret. They have to follow all the rules that school says and the parent says it's bedtime and you got to eat your vegetables. But their thoughts at a certain age, certainly when puberty starts to hit, they don't tell their parents anything about themselves if they can possibly hide it. And the odd thing is that their parents are doing the exact same thing to us. They don't want their 15-year-old to know that when they were 15, they took dad's car out and wrecked it when they weren't supposed to be driving, or, their parents went away for a weekend and they had a huge blowout party. But so because they want to be role models for their kids. But all of these secrets that we keep from each other, trivial ones and significant ones, create a gap between children and their parents or just individuals in general. And I just think that the quicker you can get to the truth of being just, this is who I am and this is who, and we relate to each other, I think the deeper the relationships and the closer we are. And that really, this secret in Frank McKenna's life really becomes this albatross around the McKenna family, until Danny finally cracks what that secret is, and the family starts to heal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. And it was interesting. I was talking to some girlfriends about the story, about, that we don't know all about our parents. And that's a lot of what this story is about, trying to find that out. And they said, well, I don't think I want my kids to know
Yeah. Well,
some of
see,
my past.
and by the way, they don't have to know everything. I'm just saying that, but in some cases, I do think that we rob our kid. What happens is, for a lot of kids, they have to recognize their parents are superheroes. They are the center of the universe. And then at some point you got to realize, hey, they're just trying to do this too. I mean,
That's right.
and I think for a lot of people, especially in the therapeutic age, they go to their graves still grinding axes against their parents for some, slight somewhere along the line. And look, if there's actual abuse, I understand that. But I'm talking about just sort of clinging to neurotic, security blankets that enable adults, people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are still angry about something that their mom or dad did 35 years ago. It's like your mom and dad were in their 40s. They were just trying to figure it out too, while paying the mortgage, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. So in this story, Danny is the main guy, Danny McKenna, and he is pretty damaged.
Yeah.
Did you initially, when you came up with the background of the story or the outline of the story, did you imagine Danny being as damaged as he was?
I think so. I think so because it's a story of redemption and forgiveness. So ultimately, and I don't mind spilling the beans on that, because this book goes to very, very dark places. But it's about recovery. It's about a second chance through honesty, and you can't heal yourself, and certainly anybody else. I don't think you can heal anybody else anyway, but you can't heal yourself unless you are truthful and honest. So once he starts to recognize what his real problems were, then he can get better, and he does ultimately by forgiving his dad and himself. But yeah, I think that I always thought that it would. I always thought that it would be. He would be a dark character, but I also thought that it would have a light ending. It would have a satisfying ending, but he has to earn it. I mean, that's a challenge, because not every redemptive story. A lot of times you could read a story of redemption and say, well, they didn't earn redemption, Then I find that as a reader or somebody who watches a movie or something and say, well, they did nothing to merit redemption. So I almost feel like they got away with something.
So can I ask you about two other characters without giving away too much of the story?
Yeah, sure.
So what was the reason for the wife? She was kind of a mess.
Well, when you are a mess, those are the choices you make. And I mean, that's basically what happens is, there's an old cliche that says you can't get love until you love yourself, right? I mean, how can you love others in a nurturing and healthy way if you're filled with self-loathing? And I think that what happens is, that's why we've all had friends that have just gone from one disastrous relationship to the other, and eventually they end up crying over a whiskey glass saying, I don't understand why I always end up with these. And he said, well, go look in the mirror, pal.
Right.
I mean, so I think that in the beginning, that's really what it is, that he's looking for love in all the wrong places. And she's out of his life, and you realize, most people, if you have a relationship that means something and the relationship fails, there's still a piece of that person in your life. In this case, she could be withdrawn. She's withdrawn from his history almost as an embarrassing accident.
That's how I saw it. He was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Yeah.
But he did.
And the family too. The family was like, what the heck, Danny?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
The other character I'm curious about is Sean.
Uh-huh.
What was his role in all of this? He was kind of quiet.
Yeah, Sean is it's it's an Irish Catholic family set in 1998. So they're all boomers basically. But in that culture, being gay was still it was a strictly don't ask, don't tell policy. I mean, the head of the Clinton administration, it was don't ask, don't tell. And everybody in the family knew that the brother Sean was gay, but it was just the unspoken. And then that's the key thing that the inappropriate first wife brings. She just blurts it out as the outsider,
Yeah.
and there it is. Now it's on the table to be dealt with. But even that secret only gets dealt with honestly after Danny uncovers his father's secret and deals with his own troubles. And now there's no more pretense for I had and this is based on, I had a cousin. He actually wasn't a cousin. We called him cousins, but he was the son of neighbors of my aunt and uncle. And he's gay. He's been gay his whole life. And yet,
You're born gay. Yeah.
yeah, he's gay his whole life. And everybody knew it. Everybody knew he's gay. He was 52 years old and, coming back from the Midwest with his roommate, and no one would ever just say, hey,
yeah.
So, and I just think that there were a lot of families, especially at that time in that culture, that treated these issues this way. And it's just another example of, it's a family that's got secrets. They keep secrets from each other. And once they're uncovered, you realize it wouldn't make any difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a secret that probably couldn't have been uncovered though until Frank McKenna had.
Yeah. Once Danny in particular realizes, why are we doing this? He missed out basically on all those years of a relationship with his brother that could have been more fulfilling for everybody. Right. And as part of the quote unquote happy ending, he actually becomes friends with his brother, who was a mystery through his whole life.
Yeah. So I want to talk about what's going on now in the world with war and not give away the story, but some of the moral and ethical dilemmas that are faced by all of your characters and by Frank McKenna are playing out right as we are sitting here. And I'm wondering what you think about what's going on and how people face war with all of this stuff going on.
Well, Frank McKenna is a World War II veteran, and the book has a big passage of his experience in that unbelievable time. And, Studs Terkel wrote a book called The Good War about the great, quote unquote, the greatest generation. And it's an oxymoron, of course. That may have been a necessary war in the sense that the evil that was unleashed in the world had to be exterminated. There's no question about it. But look at the moral ambiguities and contradictions that were made during World War II. We allied with Joseph Stalin, who killed more people than Hitler did, in order to defeat Hitler. So the atomic bomb brought an end to that war, but it created a whole other moral dilemma, which of course they just covered rather well in Oppenheimer. So the idea, what's going on right now, obviously with the Israeli-Hamas situation in Gaza, is an unbelievable atrocity. I mean, the attack in Israel was unspeakable, and by any measure, the reprisals and the answer to that may be necessary, but let's not kid ourselves that there's any such thing as humanitarian, warfare. There just isn't. It's mechanized murder. It's organized homicide, and that's just what it is. I maybe at some point, look, I do know, Wendy, I do not have the answer to this. At some point, maybe we will evolve to some higher plane where you can, a nation state or even individuals can suffer some kind of egregious attack or assault in some way, and we don't respond to it with greater force. Gandhi tried it. He got shot. All right. Martin Luther King
King
preached,
tried it. Right.
you know, the track record of turning the other cheek is
Right.
not great in terms of in the face of violence. So without getting into the politics of it, what it baffles me is trying to figure out what the objective was on the part of Hamas when it was so obvious that the response would be a massive military. I mean, how the Israeli government, no government could take that hit and not respond, period.
Right.
The bigger issue there also, though, is that, and this is something that in the postmortem, maybe we'll get to the higher place, is that the rage is loose in the world, and it's here at home. We see it in the polarization on every issue, everything, minutia. People are angry about everything, and all around the globe, you're seeing this. It's a very turbulent time in history, and it's usually the result of unaddressed hurts. When people are wounded in some way, either physically or spiritually or economically, and they try to get redress of this legitimate grievance, and the systems turn them down or shun them, then that can metastasize into something very violent. Or they'll seek out a leader that you don't necessarily, the choice may be worse. So, I mean, that's just what history teaches, that this has happened over and over and over again.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about Frank in this book was you brought it down to the individual level. The governments wage war or terrorist groups wage war, but individuals are the ones that have to fight it and suffer from it and be impacted by it. And the way that impacted Frank, your character, was significant and was part of the secret and was very powerful. It was very powerful. So I appreciated the way you did that.
Well, thanks. I can't, I have in the acknowledgement, I think, a friend of mine who was in the first Gulf War, in the Iraq War, and he had an incident in his unit. And I spoke to him about that extensively to try to get an understanding of how soldiers react to these. I mean, you take somebody from civilian life, from their life, especially in World War II, where it was a draft, or Vietnam, any place where you get drafted and you're plucked out of suburbia or whatever your life is, and you're dropped into this totally surreal and inhuman environment. And, the other thing, too, is there's only 14% of the millions of American soldiers in World War II actually were in combat. I mean, that's the other. Yeah, it's a tiny percentage. Whoever see bullets, most are filling out paperwork. There's a lot of people in the rear with the gear. There's a lot of people stateside who are putting things on trucks that go to ships that get put on. So on top of everything else, if you're one of the people that ends up in a rifle company in the Battle of the Bulge, there's a lot of people involved in that, but there's a lot of people not, and there's a lot more that aren't involved in that.
I didn't know that. I want to switch gears for a moment, because you have written for so many TV shows, successful shows, and I wanted to ask you about the writer's strike.
Okay.
One of the concerns that I understand about the writer's strike was the fear of losing jobs to artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so I wonder if you could explain, what makes a successful TV show, and could that really be written by artificial intelligence?
Probably. And I think, in fact, inevitably, and immediately, by the way. Now, this isn't some far off thing. This is, AI is mushrooming from ChatGPT. When we first said, what the hell is this? It's like Google in 1998, which goes back to Frank Shadow, that when I was writing this book in 1998, I realized Google was not in our lives in 1998. So when Danny McKenna goes out to find out his father's secret, he has to go to libraries. He has to go to Ellis Island. You can't just go on your phone. It's such a part of our lives now. We don't even think about it, but it's a whole other world. And AI is growing as fast as Google did. It never takes 1 microsecond off. It's sweeping up data. And as a strike issue for the writers, what their objection was that the writing that AI will do is stolen from people who have already written. That's all it's doing, is sweeping up scripts and sweeping up novels and sweeping up poetry and sweeping up writing, so that when somebody makes a request to do write a script for a Marvel movie, then what it's doing is it's basically just stealing the work that was done by the writers on the earlier Marvel movies. Now, here's the thing. I don't know that I don't believe personally that you're going to be able to stop this. And the actors have an even bigger problem, because, what the studios were asking for was to digitize their bodies, their faces, and use it in perpetuity. People who work as extras in movies, that profession's gone. They'll just CGI them in. And, we need a fat guy, we need a skinny guy, we need a blonde woman, and they could just type it in and it'll be there in the background of the movies, and it can, and for forever. So, but the reason I say I don't think it's possible to stop this is that we've never stopped a technology that had practical utility and saved money we just don't. I mean, we still have nuclear bombs, right? So we still have leaf blowers, and the reason we have leaf blowers is because the people that want to ban leaf blowers haven't cut their lawn in 40 years. That's the reality, because if you cut your lawn, you understand why people have leaf blowers, because they're a tool of great practical utility. And I mean, they're loud and irritating, and why you can't get everybody's gardener to show up on the same day is one of the great mysteries of life. But the bottom line is that we still have them because they work. And so if AI can do these things, I don't see how you're ever going to stop it from happening.
So do you think that Steve asked, do you think that the audience would be able to tell if a script was written by humans or AI?
The audience doesn't know who wrote things. The audience doesn't pay attention. I mean, people know who wrote books, but they know who wrote plays. It's Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, but it's Eugene O'Neill's, but in Hollywood started without writers. It started as a director's medium. It was D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. And then that little guy with the mustache and the derby, Charlie Chaplin, they started to realize, boy, people really like to see him. And the star system was born. But because talkies didn't come in until the late 1920s, the culture in Hollywood was already built where the writers were in the third position at best. Because they came in later. There were scenario writers and there were title card writers, but basically the films were director and star driven. Whereas theater, it's exactly the opposite. Like I say, Neil Simon is a superstar name on Broadway, but not a lot of people can name Broadway directors, even to this day.
And not many people know Doug McIntyre wrote WKRP in Cincinnati.
And they don't care. They know the stars, and by the way, I will say that TV directors don't get a lot of street cred either.
Right, that's true.
They don't. They don't. The showrunners, by the way, on television shows are all writers. I mean, a David Kelly or people like that are they're quote unquote producers, but they got there by being writers who could shape and create series and direct the arc of the stories, and the best of them, have amazing careers.
Yeah. Well, AI is going to be interesting in so
in
many
all
ways.
walks of life. Yeah, not just
students can they even write an essay anymore? They just plop in what they need to say, and there it comes. Change a word here and there.
Well, here's what I know. We used to talk about this, about these kids with their video games, but I know that if we had Xbox when I was 13, that's where I would have been. Right. So it's easy to look back, or from this vantage point, and say, boy, well, that's these kids and all that stuff that boomers are famously saying, which our parents were saying about us anyway, and that'll go on forever.
Sure. So what's next for you? Are you going to write another novel?
Hopefully, in January, I'll start the next project, and I'm just going to keep doing this, until until my time runs out.
So
Because
you have an idea for a new story?
yeah, at this point, one of the great things about being this age is I'm not chasing other people's dreams or other people's idea of success. It's like I know that I only have a small window of viability. And in fact, even that is largely at this point self-created because the business is done with me. I mean, it has been for a long time. It's just, there's a clock ticking on all of these things. You have a generation of peers that know you and you kind of come into the business with, and I think this is true of most businesses. And then you age out. Your people start to retire or die, move away. And now there's another generation. If I go to a TV meeting these days, I'm 66 and the guy I'm talking to is 32.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I don't know his cultural references and he doesn't know mine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can try to learn it, but people, and also as a general, people don't want to, when you've got a 35-year-old who's interviewing someone for a job and someone their dad's age comes in, and this is on us for a lot because the older people tend to say, they start to say, well, when I was your age and this is how we used to do it. And it's like, they don't care.
Right.
It's like parents are trying to tell their kids to get offline and go out and look at the eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And the kid is saying, why would I do that? I can see it through a Webb space telescope image right here, better than
Right.
looking up to the back end of a shoebox with a pinhole in it.
Right.
All the stuff that we were told to do or holding it,
Right.
Go look at the eclipse, but don't look at it. Turn your back to it and look at,
Yeah, you remember that? I remember that. Yeah.
To try to tell a kid whose whole world has come with a charger, all right,
Right.
to go play with blocks the way Abraham Lincoln played with blocks and Copernicus. I mean, it's just they don't understand what you're talking. It's not their world. It's just not their world. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that our generation is really kind of a unique transitional generation because we had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to be the last to have had that.
And there's a lot of work trying to build some intergenerational bridges to particularly between our generation and Gen Z, who is also very socially aware and realizes that if they don't save the environment, there may not be a planet for them. And so there seems to be some synergy between the younger ones and the older ones in understanding how to do things, learning their language.
They have a better chance of understanding us than we do of understanding them because they will get older too.
They will.
And as they get older, then they'll start to realize maybe they weren't totally crazy about some things, but it's going to be very difficult. It is very difficult for older people to understand the next generation because the next generation's job is to change things. They just will. Whatever is, I mean, talk to a 16-year-old about the Beatles, because this sounds like heresy, but a lot of them say it's a boy band because it was a boy. Now they were brilliantly talented, but they were on the cover of Teen Beat, and they were a boy band. They were in sync, I mean, brilliantly gifted. They had geniuses in the band, but also what they resent in having it shoved down their throats. They resent people saying the Beatles are the greatest band that ever was, period. And they said, no,
so don't say that.
Well, but people do say it. But people do say it. And the thing is, they resent it. They have their own tastes and their own likes. I mean, it's I asked on the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination, I asked my kids, what JFK, what does he mean to you? And he said, a black and white president.
Really?
Yeah. Well, JFK had been dead longer than William McKinley was dead from when I was born. All right. And how much grief did I have for the assassinated president, William McKinley? Zero.
No, I know. And I know. I mean, like I saved newspaper clippings when we landed
Right.
on the moon, and
Of
I
course.
saved newspaper clippings
Yes.
when Nixon resigned. And I was like, my kids are going to use this in science and art, and history. They're going to be so excited to take these clippings into history class. They never did.
Not only that, what's a newspaper? What in
What's
the
a
world
newspaper?
why would you want a newspaper? It's crazy. And if you
Right.
think that's bad, what are you gonna do with your grandmother's silver service?
I know, right?
Because there's
That's
nobody wants that giant tea kettle and the big silver plate that it comes on.
I know. You
That's
find that in the
engraved and
antique
you gotta
store.
get the tarnish off of it. Nobody wants that stuff.
All
So
right. So let's get to kind of wrapping this up. So one of the things I heard you talking about, like, nobody wants you anymore. What happens when you're over 50 in the Hollywood? And so I think you need to find a sense of purpose. And that's one of the things that we talk about
uh-huh.
in Hey Boomer, is that everybody needs to find a way to stay involved, feel relevant, have that sense of purpose. So I'm curious as to what you would recommend to people as they're aging to find ways to stay involved and relevant and find a purpose.
Well, first of all, you have to define success. And the relevant to who? I mean, is the first question I would ask. And ultimately, as long as you're relevant to yourself, as long as that purpose is fulfilling to you, then mission accomplished. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter, whether you have an audience of 3 million or one. It doesn't,
Mhm.
if you're following now, if you have to pay the bills, if you're relying on that sense of purpose to pay the bills, that puts that now all of a sudden other people's judgments are enormously important because
Mm.
the customers and the employers, the bosses are right. But if you're talking about somebody who is reaching retirement age, their career is coming to an end, it's it's really helpful to have another thing. The great Tony Bennett, in addition to being one of the great talents as a singer, was a wonderful painter.
Mm.
And it's almost like he had an alter ego. He signed all of his paintings with his real name, Antonio Benedetto. So there was Tony Bennett, the singer, but there was Antonio Benedetto, the painter.
Huh.
And while the singing involved audiences and musicians and arrangers and promoters and box office and all that stuff, painting was him in the canvas or the charcoal, the drawing pad and a piece of charcoal in his hand. It was something that was just one-on-one. And I do think that if you have, for the people who are so consumed with their job that or their family, even, because at some point the kids are going to leave the nest, and then what?
Mhm.
So you really need to have life working at a couple of different planes. There's the A story and the B story, and maybe a C story. I was very fortunate because I always was a writer basically at heart, even if, and I was pretty much always thinking about, if I wasn't actively writing during the years I was on the radio, and I didn't have a lot of time, but I was always making notes on things saying, that would be really fun to do. Or I'm interested in that story. This area I think would be a good story. So when I retired from radio at the end of 2018, I couldn't wait to start because
Hmm.
now I had time to jump into those other things. But if I had retired or just got fired, and a lot of people just get kicked to the curb one
That's
day,
right.
they get kicked to the curb and they've never thought about what would they do if this goes away.
That's right.
Uh, and that's a real shock. That could be a terrible blow. Now, and again, like I said, if you get kicked to the curb and you don't know how you're going to pay November's rent, then your dreams can go pound sand. You need a paycheck.
Yeah,
So that's
for
all. But
sure.
so we're talking about spiritual and psychological fulfillment. But eventually, unless you plan on dropping dead at work, and you plan on someday having retirement, being retired, then what is your vision for that? And if it's travel, if it's adventures, if it's playing pickleball, if that's what you want to do, all of those things can be, if that's what you want to do, then go for it,
Mhm.
but plan for it.
Yeah.
Figure it out. Figure out, how am I going to travel? Do I have the resources to do that? Will I have the resources to do that? But if you still have other urges and itches that you want to scratch, then prioritize them and say, okay, my bucket list is definitely getting shorter, but it's getting shorter for two reasons. One, I'm dropping things that I once thought that I wanted to do, and now I realize I really don't have the time of the knees.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I've got arthritis in my feet, so
Right.
so you start to lose some things that you had in a younger day thought you had time to do. And then some of them are going away because I'm achieving them. Certainly the publication of Frank Shadow was a biggie.
Yes.
Because for me, everything I've done is ephemeral. Radio, it's words flying through the air. No one's listening to old audio tracks from radio broadcasts. It's people ask me occasionally, do you have? No, I don't have any of it. There were 100,000 hours over 25 years of yammering. I didn't keep any of it.
It's out there somewhere.
Maybe or maybe not. But the thing is, books are, to me, are leaving a little piece of you behind. But and for me, that was important. I don't know why. Other people don't care. My father went to his great reward with leaving zero digital footprint, and he was perfectly satisfied. I always thought that it's much healthier. Those of us who covet fame need the approval of total strangers, and frequently achieve it at the expense of the people we actually live our lives with.
So there's a lesson right there. There's your next book.
Well, that's a big part of Danny McKenna's story, that he has this yearning for some kind of accolade, and he realizes that by the end he's walking through his own confetti.
Yeah. Well, let people know where to find you. So you have your website, Doug McIntyre, McIntyre.com.
Yeah, don't spell it like that heretic Reba McIntyre with that unnecessary E in there.
Right. And you can find his book there, Frank's Shadow. You can also find it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and wherever, right? Any place you find it. It's a great read. So do pick it up. Before we go, I always like to give a little teaser for who's coming up next week. And so next week, my guests are Chris Brown and Jill McCausland from something called Becoming Ellie. And so who is Ellie? Ellie is the Norse goddess of old age. And she was matched against Thor in a wrestling match. And much to his chagrin, she beat him. But Chris and Jill are friends, fellow podcasters, and their show is to encourage us to become fit and strong into our older years. So that's who I'll be talking to next week. I hope, next week, Monday, actually, since today's Thursday. I like to leave you all with the belief that we can live with curiosity, live with relevance as it means something to us, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. Thank you, Doug, for coming back and meeting with me again.
Well, since I caused the problem, that's the least I could do.
Well, have a great weekend. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey